Hey guys, how you going? Welcome to another video. Today I wanted to speak to you about something that I've been mulling over for the last couple of months, and that is upgrading my camera body. I currently have the Canon 5D Mark III, which has been a fantastic camera and it's allowed me to do some amazing things. When I bought the camera, it was second-hand off another photographer, and I've had it for 2 years now. The camera is now 11 years old, which in today's era of really rapidly advancing technology, it's sort of falling behind in some aspects. The photography part of the camera is still perfectly fine. I can take fantastic images on the camera, depending obviously if you get the settings right and you know what you're doing. There are some aspects of the camera though that are leaving me a little bit lacking in what I can and can't do with it. My initial thoughts, and this I should say is just hypothetical. I'm not necessarily going to go out tomorrow and buy a brand new camera body, but I firstly brought it down to 4 main competitors in regards to upgrading the camera body. The first one will go in order of least to most possible of me getting it. The first one was not a very specific camera, but the Nikon brand. I've never really shot with Nikon before, but I know that they have some really good cameras. But the fact that I brought myself up on Canon subconsciously makes me just never want to buy a Nikon camera. I've never tested it though, or used a Nikon apart from a couple of times at uni. They seemed okay, but the fact that when I grabbed the camera and tried using it, and to me all the buttons seemed backwards, it just didn't feel comfortable in my hands. So I know it might be a little bit petty, but first one off the list is the Nikon. I don't think I'll be getting Nikon. I'll stick with what I know. The second option was the Fujifilm X-T3, and this camera came out of nowhere, it feels like. I've known a couple people to be using Fujifilm stuff. The X-T3 was meant to be really like a quantum leap in a step up from the Fujifilm X-T3. The issue with that though is that I wouldn't be able to adapt my lenses down to the Fujifilm mount. I would have to get all new lenses, and that's not really something that I want to be doing, considering I've invested so much in all my Canon lenses. So whilst I still think the Fujifilm X-T3 is a great camera from all reports, and not that I've tested one, it might be out of the list already just by the fact that I can't swap the lenses around with it. The next 2 cameras are really making me think about which one gets into the #1 spot on my list. So number 2 I'll put is the Canon 5D Mark IV. So this, in my head, is the safest upgrade target, because it's something that I know and love. It's a Canon, it's the Canon 5D Mark III. This is the safest bet because I know it, I love it, I've been using it for the last couple of years, or the last few years actually, if you count my Canon 600D. It definitely has some improved features, and I'll go into some specifics a little bit later, but the last option that I've been looking at is the Sony A7R III. The Sony year has sort of come out of the blue, I feel like, for me, in regards to my attention to them over the last couple of years really rapidly. I've been hearing lots of good things about the Sony stuff, and the A7R III, which came out I think last year, has really proved to be a camera that can have a multitude of uses. Just without looking at any of the specs and the stats, the main reason I want to upgrade is not for the sake of upgrading. I don't want anyone to confuse my intentions with just wanting to upgrade to get the next best gear or the next best thing, which I have done in the past, but I've always in my head had a good reason for doing so, and I think it hasn't hindered my process or progress at all. I definitely think that I'd be upgrading for the right reasons. I do feel limited now in what I can do with my camera equipment that I have currently. The G7X, which I'm filming on now, goes to show that I needed something that could have autofocus in video and could actually have a flip screen so I can see myself videoing myself. Not that I necessarily want to, expand, more into like vlogging or videography type things. I just want to have that option. I want to be able to, if I'm photographing a wedding or doing whatever, have the option to video some portion as well, and I can't do that on my 5D Mark III because it doesn't have autofocus in the video, and the 60 frames per second is cropped to 720p. So that's the main thing that is really bugging me with some of the Canon stuff that's coming out. I know that the EOS R came out and it had some disappointing video specs in some aspects of it. I believe some of the 4K was cropped to a degree, which I know a lot of people weren't happy about because Canon have such great video features and they just seem to not be putting it to its fullest extent in all of their cameras. And that's why Sony, to me, feel like they are obviously the #1 brand that people are switching to from Canon or Nikon, because they are taking a lot of initiative and putting a lot of, well, if not most of their technology they can into their cameras. So we'll look at the Sony a7R III and I'll show you a couple of specs that really speak out to me, which I think are the main reasons that I'll be upgrading to get these functions in the camera. So let's have a look. Alright, so firstly, and excuse me, I'm reading off my phone, but firstly, it's a 42 megapixel sensor. That is huge. That's a big step up from the 5D Mark III. That just means I'm going to be able to take really detailed, really big but really detailed photos and just get some really nice super crisp images depending on, you know, the lens I'm using and the settings that I'm utilizing. So that's a big jump up from the 5D Mark III, and I think even the A7 IX, no, the Sony A9. Sorry, I'm getting confused. There's too many derivatives of the Sony brands. The Sony A9 and the Sony A7 III, I think they're down towards in the 20s, so 24 or 29 megapixel. So the A7R III is a big jump up in megapixel, so it's going to be taking much bigger detailed pictures. The next spec that we'll have a look at is the ISO, which is 100 up to 102,400, which I doubt that I'd ever be using up to that, but it's a nice range to have, especially down at that 100 end. I've been getting better definitely lately at being more aware of my ISO and how much that affects, you know, the image. Put it into context, like at the footy at a nighttime game, I'll be using an ISO, trying to keep it down as low as 1600 to 2000. That might be going over a little bit more, and there are pretty harsh lights at most footy grounds, but obviously it's still a nighttime game, so you are losing a bit of light, and sometimes I've found it hard to bring that light back in post, so I have to bump it up a little bit and deal with the grain. I've heard from a lot of people that the Sonys are really good in low light in video and photo as well, so that's another main reason, because I feel like sometimes the 5D Mark III just struggles a little bit in low light situations, and that could be user fault or that could be just the camera showing its age, but definitely I want something that can perform in low light, especially if I'm going to be, you know, doing weddings and things coming up in like a church or a barn or some indoor place that doesn't have much light. I don't want any grain, so that's a good point. I forgot to mention at this point as well that the Sony has an electronic viewfinder, which is one of the main things I wanted to talk about and didn't talk about it. So my camera, and a lot of cameras just have an optical viewfinder, which uses the mirror system to let you be able to see what you're seeing through the lens. But electronic viewfinder allows you to see exactly what the sensor is seeing, including all the ISO, exposure changes, aperture changes. So you can see everything you're taking a picture of in real time, which means that you don't have to second guess a lot of your test shots. You can just see it in the viewfinder straight away and be able to change the settings through that. And especially when I'm at a footy game, there is no blackout when taking a photo. So if I'm taking a series of shots and following a player or a play, there's no blackout time, so I can see exactly what's happening when the camera shutter is normally closed, which is a great thing for me because I'm not going to miss shots that I normally would by having the camera actually be closed, the sensor actually be closed, and me missing important parts of the play. So that's another main thing that I was really happy about, and especially for footy and fast-paced photography, that's a big tick for me. The next thing is that the Sonys have very good autofocusing. They have this thing called eye detection, which is basically I can touch someone's eye and it stays focused on their eye. So I can well, that person can move their head around, even if they like turn their head all the way around, and the camera will know the point that you've touched on their eye. It will stay on that point and keep their head focused at all times, especially their eye. And it isn't an exact science, it's not 100% hit rate, but it's pretty good based on the videos and all the research that I've seen so far. And believe me, I've done a lot of research the last like month or so, especially in Hong Kong, when I actually got to hold a camera, the camera A7R III in my hands and just have a feel of it. And I can tell you as well, and we might make this a separate bit, the actual body itself seems really solid, even having a flip out screen. And it's not a flip up screen, it's a flip out screen, but just even having that screen and that the solid body just makes me feel comfortable knowing that I'm not downgrading or lacking in stability in the camera from the 5D Mark III, which is a good thing. Having the flip up screen is a good thing in the DSLR, because a lot of the times I'll take the Canon out to the beach and I'll be doing like a shot really low to the ground, trying to get some waves crashing in, and I either have to get my shirt or knees wet by lying on the sand to actually be able to look at the screen, which is flat and fixed on the back of the camera. And I was thinking about getting a monitor to go on the camera so I can tilt it and actually see what I'm looking at, but I think it's just going to be more effective to just get a camera that actually has a flip screen, which would be more effective. So the next stat here is the max shutter speed of the Sony a7R III is 1/8000 of a second, which is pretty fast. I normally use about 2000 when I'm taking footy, and it would be fun to see how quickly I can take the shot, especially when I'm taking footy, providing there's enough light, because 8000 is going to be pretty dark. But even upwards of that, and knowing that the camera can have that capability of going up to 8000 is a good thing to know. It's I mean, the best range might not be the biggest range, but 30-second bulb long exposure up to 8000, that's a pretty good range to have, and there's a lot of variables in the middle there that I'll be able to use. Alright, the next main selling point of the A7R III is the fact that it is a mirrorless camera, and mirrorless cameras have been going crazy the last couple of years. A lot of people have been downgrading because of the weight. And if you're out doing a wedding with a big heavy DSLR on one shoulder and a camera bag on the other one, and you'll have a 70-200 or a 300mm lens on your other shoulder, a lot of people are switching because of this, because of the weight of the cameras. Not necessarily saying that they're much less heavier, but that little bit less that you can get might save your back or save your shoulder. So that's a really good point to think of as well. If I have everything packed into my camera bag, all my current gear, and I know I only really took my full camera bag around Hong Kong for 2 out of the 7 days just because it was so heavy, having to walk around with all that stuff on my back. So if I can limit that weight, I'll be laughing, because I don't want a sore back at the end of the day after carrying the backpack around. So alright, the next main thing for this camera, and the one that really speaks to me, is the fact that it has 4K 30 frames per second video, which is great. That's normal, that's standard, but it also has 60 frames at 1080 and 120 frames at 1080, which is great, which means that when I do my slow-mo shots with the faster shutter speed, or faster, more frames per second, I don't have to have a cropped square in all my videos of, instead of trying to stretch the 720p or the smaller frame out to fit a 1080 video, I can now have a full 1080 video, and it just fills the entire screen, which is great. I've sort of combated this lately by having maybe a couple of 60 frame shots at 720p, sort of 2 squares in the one frame, and have them cross over each other and sort of make a creative edit out of it to sort of get around that point. But the fact that I possibly now would have full 60 or 120 frames at 1080p means that I can utilize the full screen and don't have to use any tricks or something. I can just make a full video of what I can see in my head and get it on the screen. So there are some drawbacks, and we'll talk about the drawbacks with getting this camera. All my Canon lenses don't fit on a Sony body, and to combat this I would have to get a adapter. the main one that's, well, the most popular one that's being used in the market now is the Metabones adapter, and I think that's up to a Metabones Mark 5 adapter or version 5 adapter. And as they've gotten older through the years and more advanced, less and less issues have arisen in regards to putting a Canon lens onto a Sony body. Initially, a lot of people said that they struggle to autofocus when using the adapter, and these problems have slowly been ironed out as the technology has gotten better. I think the main issue now with the Metabones adapter is that the eye autofocus doesn't work, or doesn't work as well when using the Canon lenses through the Sony body, and that's something that, you know, I'll have to deal with, I guess. And again, not saying that I'm getting it, and I'd really like to try the camera, and I'll probably rent it in the meantime before I actually make a decision. But yeah, I definitely want to make sure that I can still utilize all my lenses on the body, whichever body it may be that I currently have, because it's going to take a long time, a lot of time and a lot of money to sell all those lenses and then get new ones back to fit the Sony body. And Sony don't necessarily have the same range of lenses that Canon do now. These were just a little bit of my thoughts about upgrading to a new camera body. I'm definitely not going to be rushing into it, and I've done a lot of research already, and I still plan to do a lot more research, and I definitely want to get a hands on with definitely the A7R III and probably the Canon 5D Mark IV, just to get a hands on and get an actual feel of it, because this is going to be my next long-term investment for my photography career, and I probably have to justify upgrading to this camera by getting more work as well, which is always good. And I definitely aim to do that over the summer. I've got a few things lined up, so hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you guys next time, probably from Japan, so see ya.